Hello everyone, SudrianRails here. I would like to introduce to you a new series on my channel. This series will involve a more in-depth look of how my models were created, where it started, where it ended, and all the troubles in between. Today, we will be taking a deep dive into the core of what made, built, and created my Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas was one of the more complex builds in my fleet of created characters, which means for the start of our new series, we're in for a long one. So if you can, sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the creation of Thomas the Tank Engine. Some of you who have been longtime fans of the channel may have watched how I made Thomas the Tank Engine. In short, this was a time-lapse of my creation of a Season 3 Thomas, from way back in August 5th, 2020. And though at the time the model may have looked nice, it definitely had a numerous amount of inaccuracies. Unfortunately, too many to count, but to summarize, the mesh was low poly and the proportions were very wonky. However, I did not know that just yet. This takes us to the very installment of a newer Season 1 Thomas. The date was August 19th, 2020, just a couple of weeks after the completion of the original Thomas model. All I did to make said model into a Season 1 variant was tweak the paint, change the brake pipe, and color the chassis fully black. How naive I was, huh? I had done no proportional editing to the model and it severely needed it. Most notably, the boiler was overall too small and the wheels were huge. It made him look like a monster truck, but I was still very early in my modeling career and did not have a keen eye for small details like these. But through the course of fixing up Thomas on numerous occasions, I feel I grew better as a modeler as this Thomas model had forced me to tone my skills. By September 3rd, 2020, I had come up with a version of Thomas I was semi-proud of. The proportions weren't perfect, but we were starting to get somewhere. The boiler was enlarged, and the wheels were shrunk down. The cab was given a sharper curve to closer resemble the real prop. I had stopped using Max's wheels, and decided to make my own. However, mine turned out to be severely inaccurate and still too large. But at the same time, I thought I had gotten them just right. But we'll come back to the wheel dilemma later. 1 week after inspecting the model with a close eye, more and more the model started to look inaccurate. There were some things I had noticed, yes, but the large part of inaccuracies were things I couldn't put my finger on. I was so close to throwing in the towel, and I knew I had to call for help. Guardsman and I had been friends for a long time. At the time, I was openly stressed about my situation with Thomas and voice calls. It turned out that Guardsman had a good eye for the little important details in Gauge 1 scale models. We spent that afternoon and into the late hours of the night fixing up the model to bring it to a closer, more authentic feel to the model. At around 4 AM, we called it a night, and after much work, we ended with a result we were content with. A month had passed since then, but unfortunately, once again, as time progressed, more and more inaccuracies began to pop out. Most notably, the eyes were extremely jarring. They were sunken, too glossy, and really creepy. I don't know how, but back then, this wasn't even an issue I had picked up on. It was a fellow modeler who had pointed it out, and helped me step by step into fixing this eye problem. Had he not made the courtesy of walking me through the steps, chances are the model would still look this creepy to this day. The date was October 18th, 2020. Many small tweaks were made to the model, and I had officially called the model complete. I couldn't pick up on any notable problems with the mesh and thought we were done. This was the final mock-up of what I wanted for the final render reveal for my Thomas model. At the time, this was my best work, both modeling and rendering. I studied the model in this render for a couple of days. It looked good enough and looked ready to me. The face was good enough and fairly close to the real thing. The proportions weren't perfect, but they were good enough. The wheels weren't perfect either, but they were good enough. Good enough. A little after that, I decided to take a break from modeling and unwind with a movie recommended to me. At the start, I didn't think much of it, but at the end of the movie, it had completely changed my outlook on modeling and any personal goals. You see, I never had anybody to teach me when I started. I asked for help, but no one did. Of course, they're not responsible for holding my hand through it, but it was definitely hard to start up on my own with the help of no one. And while that on its own might be good, it meant I had no teacher. Nobody told me what I was doing wrong. Not just modeling wise, but passionately wise. Nobody was really there to tell me that I should keep on going, that it was a good start, but not a great model just yet. All I had for myself were two phrases: good job and good enough. I know this sounds like the world's saddest sob story, but hear me out here. For a movie completely unrelated to modeling, there was a scene in the movie that was truly chilling and changed my modeling style and outlook forever.
So imagine if Jones had just said, well, that's okay, Charlie. That was all right. Good job. And Charlie thinks to himself, well, shit, I did do a pretty good job. End of story. No bird. That to me is an absolute tragedy. But that's just what the world wants now. I wonder why jazz is dying. I'll tell you, man, and every Starbucks jazz album just proves my point, really. There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
You see, what I was doing at the time, which is a very crucial, very damaging habit to any modeler's career, was settling. This scene inspired me to no longer settle for all right. No longer call it a day when we were just starting to get really close. I put this part of the video in here not to boast or claim to be great, but in hopes to inspire any of the modelers watching or anyone thinking of starting to not only reach for your goals, but surpass them. And so I did just that. And this is where we truly start the creation of Thomas the Tank Engine. To start, the most notable part of Thomas's inaccuracies were his wheels. The real props wheels were Markland BR55s, and though I originally tried replicating them, I clearly did not do a good job on them. I did my best, but I didn't have the resources. Luckily enough, Unhelpful Git was kind enough to reach out to me about my wheel problem. Not only did he give me a numerous amount of pointers for my wheel, he was also nice enough to send his own wheel himself for me to study on a closer level. After some work, the wheel was finished and it looked great and spot on. It was scaled correctly and was fitted onto my model. For any of you with a keen eye, you may have noticed that Thomas was too long from buffer to buffer. It was an overhanging and looming presence on the model that took me forever to notice, but finally it did dawn upon me. I got to work, made him shorter and stumpier like he should be, and made him more faithful to his real Season 1 counterpart. It was November 7th, and the model was starting to get really close to being the final rendition. I was happy with it, but there were, as always, some errors with the model. As a modeler, you do have to have a lot of patience when it comes to fixing up the small things on your projects. Because keep in mind that the tiniest change in size or color can make the entire model look 10 times better. At this stage of the Thomas model, it may be hard to notice the issues with him, and I don't blame you. As the guy who actually made the model piece by piece, it took me forever to find these inaccuracies. Here are a few of those said inaccuracies you may not have picked up on yet. Eyes bulged out too far, brake pipe bent back too far, The bases of the lamp irons were too thick, the step ladders were too close inward, the white paint and brass paint were too dark. The housing of the brake pipe should not even be there. The cab roof and running board were still too low poly. The bottom part of the funnel was too chunky. The dome was too tall, coupling housing was too high up, and the entire coupling model was wrong. Several days passed and I had not picked up on those errors. It was November 30th, and this was one of the last renders I took of Thomas. At the time, I thought he was done. The textures looked nice, and there was nothing overbearingly wrong with the model. I started working on other models and didn't open up Thomas for a long time. Flash forward to February 17th, 2021. Of course, there were still some errors on the model, but I was yet to pick up on them. But this time, I didn't have to say that it was just good enough. For the first time in a long while, I felt that we were truly getting somewhere. The eyes looked good, there was a much better face texture, and a new original car paint material on him. I was really proud of the outcome. However, the model had one very big flaw. If you saw my How I Made Thomas video, for the better part of that video, I spent a large portion working on the chassis. Compared to the rest of the model, the chassis were probably one of the oldest meshes on the model. And after improving and modeling with the several months that passed, the chassis no longer held up to those days' standards. They were old, inaccurate, and in need of a serious upgrade. Eventually, I came around to contacting Covey, Thomas Modeler on Twitter. Covey is a very detailed Gauge 1 modeler who has been in the community for over 4 years now, and has worked very closely with making beautiful Gauge 1 replicas. Covey had the full uncut Markland BR55 chassis, which were the chassis they used on Thomas in Season 1 through 5. The hard part was that these were uncut chassis. What Thomas had was a cut down chassis compressed to fit his 060 wheel configurement. At the time, there was no orthos for Thomas's chassis, so what I had to do was painstakingly make the entire BR55 chassis uncut in Blender. And now, a short presentation, render for render, of the build process of the chassis. Unfortunately, I didn't save any pictures of the cutting down process of the chassis, but let me tell you, it was tedious. It took me 4 hours to figure out, but it really felt like a puzzle piece, like solving a Rubik's Cube. A big thank you goes to Covey for the help. Finally, with the super hard part out of the way, we round out to the Thomas model once again. The date was March 5th, 2021, and Thomas finally had his new chassis and was really starting to look complete. Once again, I thought he was 100% done, and set up a final render look for him. The final render was looking alright, but I felt it looked a bit tacky. Very plasticky, and the faces were very matte and flat looking. It was a decent start, yes, but it wasn't sitting right with me, and eventually the render setup was scrapped. Regarding the flat look of the faces, Rexecutions would later on show me how to bake faces to give them more depth and shadow, but that part didn't happen for a while. We now move forward to April 22nd, 2021. Once again, like always, I thought I was done, but this time I was actually pretty close. Not much was changed, but a few things were. The whistle was altered slightly, and the coupling was re-updated to a more accurate Markland one, thanks to Xanthera for pointing it out. Once again, in a semi-completed state, Thomas was left to rest in his file while I worked on other models. It was not until September 6th that the file was reopened. Small updates were made once again, such as thinning out the dome, a new, much more accurate brake pipe, and an entire rebuild on his running board. Finally, Thomas was entering his last stages in his production and was shaping up very nicely. Now here is the very interesting part. Way back in November of 2020, I commissioned JJE09 in an attempt to see if he would be interested in texturing the Thomas model. We had several conversations about the planning part and texturing, liveries, etc. JJE was very kind in accepting all my small little updates I made on the model throughout the commission process, and I'm happy to say that he did wonders on my model. Around December of 2021, the texturing process was still progressing. However, I decided last minute on a sneak peek reveal of Thomas planned for the Christmas newsletter. I asked DJE if he could send what he had so far. He kindly agreed and was in fact pretty close to completion. Thankfully, everything worked out and Thomas made it into the newsletter in time. He sent the Substance Painter file for me to finish texturing as I had asked. A big thank you goes out to JJE, who really gave my model a new depth of realism with his amazing texturing techniques and knowledge. As a Substance Painter user myself, I knew my way around the software and knew how to mess with the materials. I added roughness maps and messed with the reflectivity to add a glossy car paint look, much like the model had in Season 1. The texturing was a mix of JJE's work and my additional features. However, the wheels and all the beautiful paint chips and tire scratches were done by JJE entirely. Truly stellar work. I applied the textures into Blender and it looked phenomenal. Once again, a big thank you to JJE for agreeing to help. I, for one last time, reviewed the model with Kelsthorpe, and one of the last flaws with the model was the bunker. It was too extended and too square, when it should have been a more rectangular look. Thankfully, the updates to the bunker and a few to the cab windows and widening out the running board were made. As a last stretch, I retextured some of the new meshes and thankfully every texture went flush with one another. I am proud to say that on December 20th, 2021, my Season 1 model of Thomas the Tank Engine was officially complete. Of course, this is all pre-trained updates, such as other liveries and faces made by James Bond 007, but he was officially, in my books, complete as a 3D model. I want to thank every one of you who has watched this far into this video, and I hope that you have thoroughly enjoyed the entire process and creation of Thomas the Tank Engine. Please, let me know your thoughts and who you would like to see in the next installment of The Creation Of. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.